In Bryant Park, back in July, I enjoyed a picnic with some classmates from rabbinical school. Though we had gone to different campuses, 2 in New York, 2 in LA, and 2 in Cincinnati, we became dear friends through our extended summer semester in Jerusalem. We reminisced about how 6 of us shared a tiny apartment in Rachael, about the mulberry tree on our porch, and some of our bigger cooking failures, including homemade mac and cheese made with vanilla cream. Yum. Caught up in all these memories, I declared I would give anything to go back and live even just 1 week of that summer over again. On the subway home, I kept asking myself, wait, why did I say that? It wasn't that I didn't have good memories of that summer, yet the statement felt dishonest somehow, or otherwise incomplete. So, I perused the diary from that summer to unearth the source of my discomfort. I soon found it. Written in that diary were pages of personal pain, homesickness, COVID, identity theft, and saying goodbye to my grandma who died that July. As if that weren't enough, I had a hospitalization stint where the doctors didn't speak enough English and I didn't speak enough Hebrew, so the resulting diagnosis was, it's either food poisoning or appendicitis. Come back if you're dying. The diary describes what was undoubtedly a difficult summer. But why don't I remember it that way? There's a term for what might be going on with my memory of Jerusalem: Rosy Retrospection. Rosy Retrospection is the tendency to see our pasts through rose-colored glasses, focusing on the good and minimizing the bad. My own rosy retrospection made me feel like Moses this week in Parashat Ekev. Moses delivers his final messages to the Israelites who stand poised on the threshold of the promised land after 40 years of wandering. Listen to what he tells them, the reason he gives for the 40-year wait. Remember the long way that the Lord your God has made you travel in the wilderness these past 40 years, that God might test you by hardships to learn what was in your heart, whether you would keep God's commandments or not. But let's rewind the tape on that, Moses. Is that why God made the Israelites wander in the desert? When we go back to Numbers 14, those 40 years of wandering were not a test of commitment via hardships, but instead, they were God's punishment. Once the scouts returned from their recon mission to the Promised Land and made an intimidating report, the Israelites lost their faith and courage. And yet, isn't it interesting or telling that Moses recounts it differently at the end of his life? When he brings up the 40-year punishment in this speech, it's no longer a punishment. Those 40 years were reframed as an opportunity to test his people's mettle through the challenges they encountered. Moses does this again in the next verse. He explains that the reason God gave the Israelites manna, little flakes of food, in the desert was to teach the Israelites that man does not live on bread alone, but on the word of God. But if we go back to read the first version of the story in Exodus, we see that's not why God gave the manna. The episode of manna was a trial of obedience to make sure people took only what they needed and nothing more. There's nothing about spiritual nourishment. For 2 verses in a row, Moses takes an episode from the Israelites' journey and tells a different, new, and improved version of the story. A version where the Israelites learn valuable lessons about trusting God instead of being punished by God. I have my diary to fact check myself. Moses has the Torah, which our tradition tells us he wrote himself. Couldn't he have double-checked his notes on these 2 episodes before he started writing his speech? Is he misremembering in his old age? Or is he choosing to deliberately reframe or even rewrite the events? This is where Rosy retrospection comes into play. Maybe Moses chooses not to remember God's anger and disappointment the same way I choose not to remember the rancid falafel from Hummus Ben Sira. But there is a cognitive function to Rosy retrospection. Its primary goal is to improve our perspectives on ourselves and our experiences. During a challenging period, we often feel frustrated and thwarted. But given time and the power of Rosy retrospection, we can look back on that same challenge and see it as something that fostered personal growth. Though Moses knows what actually happened with the manna and the scouts, he chooses to help the Israelites remember their past in the wilderness through a rosier lens, essentially telling them, these years weren't meaningless. They were a meaningful struggle. You were preparing for this moment, learning skills so you could learn to love God, build a new society, and be ready for the promised land. Moses turns Rosy retrospection into a foundation myth, where punishments are turned into lessons and fortitude. He's giving his people a gift. The Israelites enter the promised land with purpose and perspective, able to look back on their time in the wilderness as a learning experience that strengthened their relationship with God. It took rereading my diary to remember how much I struggled that summer. Because, like Moses, I shifted perspective given time. Homesickness, identity theft, hospitalization, those memories faded. What gained strength were memories of my roommates making cards for me and leaving food outside my door when I had COVID, of engaging in lively debates about whether a robot could be considered Jewish if its inventor was Jewish. 40 years in the wilderness, reframed, taught the Israelites who they were. My summer in Israel taught me about how I functioned in adversity and who my true friends are. It might be easy to see Moses' reframe as a lie. Those moments, those memories, didn't happen the way he recounts them. The summer I lived through in Jerusalem and the summer I remember don't match either. Many of us in the congregation tonight might be rethinking memories of our own and wondering how we've colored in our own pasts. But Rosy retrospection isn't anything we need to resist. It's a vital process. It helps us see how far we've come in difficult life periods, shields us from our more negative memories, and gives shape to our more complete narrative about ourselves. Rosy retrospection is a meaning maker. It can reveal a great deal, not just about the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves, but the lessons we hope we're learning along the way.